I am just so proud and inspired by the way the food industry has stood up during the course of the COVID-19 pandemic. I often say the food industry is at its very best when our customers and communities need us the most, and I don't think that's ever been more true than it is today. And we've really tested the limits of the supply chain, and we have really bent it, but we've at the same time expanded it. And by and large, we have been able to replenish at unprecedented rates based on unprecedented demand. Not sure where that's going to end, but I will try to address some of that in my remarks as we go through all this. So if you'd go to the next slide, please. I just thought I'd tell you a little bit about who we are. So FMI is a food industry association, much like NGA. And it's really interesting when I think about sort of the three things that we do that preeminently characterize our mission. It's to advance a safer, healthier, and more efficient consumer food supply. And I don't think that's ever been more important than it is today, particularly in the context of the current crisis. And I'll talk a little bit about safety. I'll talk a little bit about healthy. I'll talk a little bit about efficiency. And I will try, pretty much predicated on the questions that have been asked today, to provide an Hispanic lens on some of this as well. While I didn't make it a part of the slides I prepared, we've done a lot of work on Hispanic marketing, and I'll try to provide a little bit of context on that as we go through this. So our membership, I'd like to say FMI retail and wholesale members come in 31 delicious flavors, and they range from the one-store operator in the Pacific Northwest to Walmart and Amazon and everyone in between. So we represent a slew of independent operators, self-distributing chains, wholesalers, both voluntary and cooperative. And more recently, and perhaps tellingly, we made a significant change to our bylaws about 1.5 years ago to admit manufacturers, food suppliers, as what I'll call full members of FMI. So not just associate members, but with all the rights and privileges as retail and wholesale members, meaning they fully participate in all of our communities, and right up to and including being members of our board. And you might sort of explain FMI's mission in 3 buckets. We advocate, and that means interfacing with lawmakers and regulators on Capitol Hill, at the state level and municipalities, and that's manifested itself in a variety of ways, particularly in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. The second bucket is to really collaborate. As Gus alluded to, we spend a lot of time convening the industry relationship, and we bring leaders together to identify and prioritize the most important issues that either require critical mass as an industry to address, or that lead to large-scale transformational change that either enhance efficiency or help to create demand. And the third pillar is really around education. We do a lot to educate both our members as well as any number of external stakeholders, and beyond the government officials, there's media, there's institutional investors, there's the NGOs and consumer groups, and increasingly it's the consumers themselves. And if I might spend a couple of minutes, if you go to the next slide, please, I'll just talk a little bit about these emerging issues that we have identified. And I think they're important to understand, particularly in the context of the current set of circumstances we find ourselves under. So if you look at these 5 issues, they're all interrelated, but none is more important than this new era of consumerism. And I can also tell you that while price, taste, and convenience are still primary drivers to the path to purchase, they're now just table stakes. There are new drivers that have emerged, and a majority of Americans across geographies, demographies, incomes, races, from age groups and onward, all believe that there are a number of new issues that are affecting the way they shop. One is health and well-being and health and wellness. And frankly, the Hispanic community has a huge role in this. And I might add that the Hispanic community is probably the single biggest growth opportunity for grocers in the country today. And actually, Hispanic shoppers define health and wellness in a variety of ways. They have a very mindful connection to the products that they buy and to the places that they shop. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. The second thing around this era of new consumerism is food and product safety. And it's interesting because historically food safety meant if I eat or drink this, will I get sick? In today's world, it's a much broader, more strategic issue. What are the implications of feeding this product to my child or rubbing this lotion into their skin or into their hair over the course of time? And now with the onset of COVID-19, we're back to, is this product safe? And I don't even really like the term safe food, but that is what consumers want. So track and trace and transparency and traceability is more important than ever. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the back end. The second issue is the new marketplace and what we call omni-channel. A number of you have asked questions around digital. Probably there are two great shifts in the marketplace over the last 5 months. One is the fact that pre-COVID, 50 cents of every food dollar was being spent away from home. And now that's almost evaporated. It's less than 5 cents of every food dollar. And we're now eating meals at home, 3 meals a day, day after day, week after week, month after month. That's been a massive shift in the marketplace. The other thing has been the shift to digital. And several of you have asked about it. And the increases in digital shopping range anywhere from double to triple digits. It's been probably the greatest single impact. And I will just putting it into the context of Hispanic. Hispanic consumers are very tech savvy shoppers. 80% of them are regular internet users. Almost 98% have smartphones, and they shop online almost 50% as much as the average consumer. And that's including regular shopping, frequent shopping, and occasional shopping. So we have a whole new reality in the marketplace that we have to address. The third area is technology, either emerging technology or proven technology. If you're not technology enabled today, it's tough. You gotta, as Carlos said, you don't want to go to the moon, but you want to serve your customers and you want to make bets on the technology that's going to better enable you to understand your shoppers, to provide them with kind of the personalized, customized experiences that they're seeking. So for example, and Carlos mentioned that the Hispanic market is not monolithic. People come from Mexico, they come from Central and South America. There are differences between Peruvians and Bolivians and Argentines. And the more you understand that, and the more you can tailor that experience to them, the better you're going to be. And I might also add, there's an opportunity now to bring these products to non-Hispanics as well. So making these experiences lively, understanding culture, educating, translating, doing all of those things is more important than ever. And technology does help us to do all of those things. And technology is really important in the context of digital. What does your e-commerce site look like? How are you going to provide fulfillment, whether it's click and collect and pick up at store or it's home delivery? All of those issues are of paramount importance. The workplace. The workforce, workers are the single greatest asset that this industry possesses, although we're consumer facing and product based. And by the way, taking care of our associates, those frontline workers, those heroes in store, in distribution centers, and manufacturing facilities has been job one throughout this pandemic. And the future of the workforce is going to change necessarily as a result of all these things that have happened. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then lastly, what's the future of food production going to look like from a track and trace standpoint in an era of globalization and localization taking place at the same time? In a small planet with finite resources that's getting a little hotter and more crowded all the time, how can we ensure that 50 years ago we can sustainably take care of our communities and our customers? So these are the emerging issues that I think will be with us for some time to come. If you go to the next slide, please. So I don't want to spend too much time on this. I think Laura covered a lot of the consumer trends that have been taking place, but I do want you to know that FMI has put up a lot of coronavirus resources on our website and beyond. We are also tracking consumer behavior with our partners at Hartman Research. They do our annual grocery trends every year. And it's ironic that we published the 2020 edition of those trends in late February, just before COVID. So since the second week in March, we've been tracking consumer behavior throughout, and all the results of that, and consumer behavior has shifted throughout this pandemic. And I will tell you, it's kind of interesting. We get a lot of contradictory data sometimes between the way consumers say they feel and the way shoppers actually purchase. And we're in the process of reconciling a lot of that. And as you can see from the slide here, we are preparing a number of resources. We're interfacing with government at the federal, state, and local level, State's Department of Health as well. We're trying to influence both the agencies, CDC, FDA, USDA, and the like, as well as providing guidance back to our members about various rules and recommendations. Because so much of this has been decentralized and taken on by the state offices, the governors, and municipalities, we have been standing up regular policy calls twice a week for months now, at least with all of our state representatives, so we get a sense of what's happening on the ground around the country, so we can share that with our members and they can learn from each other. We've also been working on a lot of the waivers that we need from the regulatory agencies. So Laura referenced online SNAP. One of the things that's been interesting in this, and I noticed in some of the questions, there's been a shift from food service to retail. And while we had shortages in select product categories in retail, there was an abundance of supply and capacity in food service. But we needed to get a lot of waivers to take, say, institutional products labeled not for resale to be made available at retail. And it also tested the supply chain, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well. We've also put a lot of business solutions into place, sourcing PPE from around the world for our members. We've created a lot of communities using a lot of tools online as well. But there's two in particular that I just want to quickly draw our attention to. If you'll go to the next slide, please. They say that necessity is the mother of invention. And two things happened during this pandemic that have been quite extraordinary. One is that as the demand to hire at food retailing exploded, and you saw all that. You saw the numbers from Amazon and Walmart and Instacart and Kroger and others, and you can take that down to the single store operator working in a local community. We needed to expand our workforce to meet the unprecedented demand that we were facing, while at the same time our counterparts in the restaurant industry, in travel, transportation, and hospitality furloughed or laid off millions. So we worked very quickly in mid-April to put up a talent exchange. And this talent exchange was put up with Eightfold AI, which is artificial intelligence. It is a human resources, artificially intelligently driven platform. And we are mixing and matching our needs to hire with all those furloughed and laid off employees. So we now have 750,000 jobs listed to be filled on the supply side, on the demand side, and all that supply will come from those other industries. And it is our goal by the time this is done to have 1 million job matches. Now, this may be an ad hoc partnership that only lives through the pandemic, or this may become part of the hiring process going forward. Many of these jobs may be temporary, many of these jobs may become permanent, but at least we feel like we're providing a platform for the industry in order to meet those demands. The second thing that happened was this unprecedented need for product, for transportation capacity, for warehousing. So we, partnering with a group out of Memphis called The Seam, which is a electronic trading platform, launched the Food Industry Exchange next month. And this is a place where on the demand side, buyers can go in seeking products or seeking services from broadline food service distributors, manufacturers, produce and meat distributors, seafood distributors, and the like. And they can do either discrete searches for discovery of product or just put in an immediate need. And the suppliers on the other side of that can put in either buy now offers or can mix and match to meet the needs that are posted by those retailers and wholesalers. We do believe that the Food Industry Exchange, while born out of this pandemic and a crisis, will help us and become more of a utility for the industry going forward. So when the next crisis strikes, be it a natural disaster, be it some other novel zoonotic disease that becomes another pandemic, you see what's going on in California now with fire, you see what's happening with the tropical storms and hurricanes that are happening, so that when the need arises, all we do is turn up the volume on the exchange and we can meet those needs going forward. So with all of that as a backdrop, let me just spend 2 minutes and taking a look ahead. So if you go to the next slide, please. And this might address some of the questions that came up earlier. So I really picked sort of 6 areas. One is the consumer, and I go back to the research that Laura shared earlier. At the end of all this, consumers don't get up in the morning and make a distinction between retail and food service. They have a meal occasion. They have a need to satisfy their requirements for breakfast. And where they go to get it or whether they stay home and prepare it is going to be the big question going forward. Consumer patterns and behaviors have shifted maybe irrevocably during all this. And their confidence for going back into restaurants, and we've got an index that shows that, restaurants, hotels, airlines, airport lounges are probably the last to come back. And right now, retailers are rating very, very, very highly. And while hot bars and salad bars and on-premise dining facilities are closed, retailers are gaining a lot of equity and loyalty by becoming that last semblance of reality or normalcy for consumers who are going out and shopping. So we are going to see massive shifts in the consumer. And the question is, will it come back to a zero-sum game of 50 cents on every dollar being battled for between restaurants and retailers? Or will some of these partnerships that have been developed in the course of the pandemic stand the test of time? From that, I will go to assortment. Somebody asked the question earlier, with all of the rationalizing of SKUs to expand capacity to meet the requirements for those most in-demand items, assortments have changed. Schematic development has changed. Planograms look different. What's this going to look like at the back end? Because what we've done is we've eliminated a lot of line extensions. So we realized, we maybe didn't need that 11th flavor of X, name the product or category, or that 11th formulation of that household cleaning supply or sanitation product. We need basics. We do believe there is going to be a reckoning at the back end of all this. We do believe that we will see a significant change in what goes online versus what goes on shelf. Some of that remains to be seen, but there is definitely going to be a change, a sea change in the way we reimagine assortment and the in-store experience. If I go to supply chain, I'll just say we've been tested like never before. We've learned a lot. And if I think about supply chain, we've learned that we've got siloed supply chains in the food industry ecosystem. There's a retail supply chain. There's a food service supply chain, and there's a supply chain that feeds people, those in need. So through the nation's network of food banks and pantries and local supply, we've seen all the devastating pictures of crops being plowed under or fresh milk being spilt out. We recognize that there's no shortage of supply per se. What there is a shortage or a lack of connectivity between these supply chains. And as we're learning better ways of working together, I think when the next crisis occurs, we'll be in a much better position to meet demand in each one of those segments. Next slide, please. And this is the last slide, by the way. Food safety. I can't say enough about this. Consumers want to know if their food is safe. Although we know that the coronavirus is not foodborne per se, consumers want to know. And provenance and track and trace and transparency are going to become more important than ever before. So not only are they going to want to know where those avocados are grown, they're going to want to know who picked them, where they were shipped, how they were shipped, where they were stored, and who put them in the bin at the store level, the farmer's market, or in the salad. So that's going to become critically important. A couple of issues came up with regard to sustainability. We're going to have to balance the need for food safety with sustainability. We've seen a huge increase in single-use plastics, for example, and we were making great progress on the circular plastics and packaging economy pre-pandemic, and we've kind of like given ourselves a buy for a period of time to ensure that consumers believe in the safety and the integrity of the foods that they're buying, but that buy won't last forever, and we're going to have to get back to those sustainability initiatives. Consumers are going to demand it. And then my very last comment is around diversity. And I mean that both in the workplace and the marketplace. We have been at diversity and equity and inclusion initiatives for some time. Certainly, I think at store level, we're doing a better job of reflecting the marketplaces that we serve. But when you come up through the ranks, with few exceptions, unless you're maybe say a pure play specialty or ethnic retailers, we're nowhere near as good as we need to be. We need to be much better. And particularly in light of what's happened recently during the course of the pandemic and the George Floyd killing, we need to rise to the moment when it comes to racial injustice. And we are really leaning in and having hard conversations and figuring out what we need to do as an industry, specifically for the Black community and others, to ensure that we're doing the right things within the workplace and within the marketplace, and that we are part of the fabric of those communities going forward.